Have you ever looked at a stranger and decided exactly who they were before they even spoke a word at the Velvet Room? New York's most exclusive restaurant Judgment was the main course. When a man in a tattered coat walked in sitting in silence while the wealthy elite mocked him, everyone assumed he was a beggar who had lost his way. They laughed, they sneered, and they called security. But they made one fatal mistake. They didn't know who he really was. And they certainly didn't expect the quiet waitress pouring their water to be the only one who spoke his secret language and held the key to their destruction. The rain in Manhattan didn't just fall. It felt like it was trying to erase the city. It hammered against the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of the Velvet Room, a restaurant so pretentious that they didn't put prices on the menu because, as the saying went, if you had to ask, you couldn't afford it. Audrey adjusted her apron, fighting the urge to rub her aching lower back. She was 24, studying linguistics at NYU by day and carrying trays of overpriced lobster risotto by night. Her feet throbbed in the mandatory 2-inch heels, but she kept her smile plastered on. She had to. Her rent was 3 days late, and her landlord, Mr. Kowalski, had the patience of a starving shark. "Audrey, table 4 needs more wine." "Now," snapped Mr. Henderson, the floor manager. Henderson was a man who believed that yelling was a form of leadership. He was short, round, and sweated profusely even in the air-conditioned dining room. He treated the wealthy patrons like gods and the staff like insects. "On it, Mr. Henderson," Audrey said, grabbing a bottle of Dom Perignon. Table 4 was occupied by Derek Sterling and his entourage. Derek was the kind of man who wore sunglasses indoors and spoke loud enough for the next 3 tables to hear about his latest stock acquisition. He was young, handsome in a jagged sort of way, and completely insufferable. "Finally," Derek sneered as Audrey approached. "I was about to tweet that the service here has gone to the dogs. Do you know who my father is?" "I apologize for the wait, sir," Audrey said, pouring the wine with practiced precision. She knew exactly who his father was. Everyone did. Richard Sterling, the real estate mogul. Derek was just the spare heir spending the fortune. "Just pour it, and try not to spill it on my Armani. It costs more than your tuition." Derek laughed, his friends joining in like a chorus of hyenas. Audrey bit her tongue. Keep the job, pay the rent. As she retreated to the kitchen, the heavy oak doors at the front of the restaurant creaked open. The room, usually filled with the low hum of expensive conversation and clinking silverware, went quiet. A man stood in the entrance. He was soaking wet. Water dripped from the hem of a dark, oversized wool coat that looked like it had been bought 3 decades ago. His hair was silver plastered to his forehead by the rain, and his boots were heavy work-worn leather muddying the pristine marble foyer. He looked like a ghost from a different era, or perhaps just a homeless man seeking shelter from the storm. Mr. Henderson was on him in a second, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "Excuse me?" Henderson barked, marching across the room, his polished shoes squeaking. "Sir, you cannot be in here. This is a private establishment. The shelter is 6 blocks down." The man didn't flinch. He just looked at Henderson with eyes the color of steel, cold, hard, and unreadable. He didn't speak. He just slowly reached into his pocket. "Don't you dare pull anything!" Henderson shrieked, stepping back. Several customers gasped. Derek, at table 4, stood up looking delighted by the drama. The man pulled out a slightly crumpled, wet reservation card. He held it out with a steady hand. Henderson snatched it, squinting at the ink. "Reservation. You don't make me laugh. Did you find this in the trash?" The man remained silent. He pointed a calloused finger at a small secluded table in the corner near the window. It was empty. Henderson looked at the card, then at the man, then at the disgusted faces of his high-paying customers. "Look, pal, I don't know how you got this or whose joke this is, but you're bad for business. You smell like wet dog and you're dripping on my floor. Get out." The man didn't move. He stood like a statue, an anchor in the storm of Henderson's rage. "I said get out," Henderson yelled, reaching out to grab the man's arm. "Wait!" The voice was soft, but it cut through the tension. It was Audrey. She had been watching from the service station, and something about the man, the way he held his posture, the lack of fear in his eyes struck a chord in her. It was the same look her grandfather used to have, a look of dignity that had nothing to do with money. Audrey stepped between Henderson and the stranger. "Mr. Henderson, if he has a reservation, we have to seat him. It's the law. If we refuse him service and he has a valid booking, he could sue. You know the owners are terrified of bad press." Henderson paused. The mention of the owners, a faceless conglomerate known as the Zenith Group, always made him sweat. He glared at Audrey. "Fine," he hissed, lowering his voice. "Seat him. Put him in the back corner behind the pillar. And Audrey, you serve him. If he can't pay, and looking at him he definitely can't, it's coming out of your paycheck." "Understood," Audrey said quietly. She turned to the man and offered a gentle smile. "Right this way, sir." The man looked at her. For a second the steel in his eyes softened. He nodded once, a sharp military-like motion, and followed her. As they walked past table 4, Derek loudly cleared his throat. "Hey, waitress! Make sure you sanitize the seat after the hobo leaves. I don't want fleas jumping into my pasta." The entire restaurant erupted in laughter. The old man didn't react. He just kept walking, his heavy boots thudding against the floor, a silent rhythm of endurance. But Audrey saw his hand clench into a fist at his side, tight, white-knuckled, and trembling with suppressed rage. Audrey seated the man at the small table tucked away in the shadows. It was the worst seat in the house, usually reserved for solo diners the staff wanted to forget. She handed him a menu. "Can I start you off with something to drink, sir?" "Perhaps some hot tea to warm up?" Audrey asked, her voice low and kind. She ignored the glares she was getting from the other waiters, who were furious that a vagrant was lowering the tip potential of the section. The man stared at the menu, his brow furrowed. He moved his lips slightly, but no sound came out. He looked confused, perhaps even overwhelmed. "Sir," Audrey asked gently. He looked up at her, and for the first time she saw a flicker of panic behind the steel gaze. He tapped the menu specifically on the filet mignon, then shook his head. He tapped the water glass. "Just water," Audrey guessed. He nodded. "I'll bring that right out. And some bread." As she walked away, the atmosphere in the restaurant shifted from shock to open hostility. Derek Sterling had decided that the silent man was his evening's entertainment. "Hey, Gandalf!" Derek shouted across the room, spinning his wine glass. "Did you lose your way to the soup kitchen? The menu is in English, or is that too complicated for you?" The man didn't turn around. He sat with his back straight, staring out the window at the rain. "He's deaf, or maybe just stupid." Derek's date, a woman named Chloe who wore more diamonds than fabric, giggled. "God, Henderson needs to grow a spine and throw him out. It's ruining the vibe." Audrey returned with a pitcher of water and a basket of warm, crusty bread. She placed it down, and the man's hands immediately went to the bread. He broke it with a reverence that suggested he knew the value of every crumb. "Is there anything else?" Audrey asked. The man reached into his coat pocket again and pulled out a small leather-bound notebook. He opened it and showed her a page. It was a drawing, a sketch done in charcoal of a specific type of fish, a herring and a boiled potato. Beside it, written in shaky block letters, was a word, "Silled." Audrey froze. She stared at the word. She looked at the man. He tapped the word "silled" and looked at her with pleading eyes. To anyone else in the restaurant, the word was gibberish. To Mr. Henderson, it would be proof of insanity. But to Audrey, who had spent the last 3 years studying Germanic linguistics and had done a semester abroad in the coastal towns of Scandinavia, it was a key. Silled. It was Norwegian for herring. But it wasn't just the word. It was the way he wrote it. The distinct slant of the letters, the specific dialectical spelling he had scribbled in the margin, rackfisk. Fermented fish, a traditional acquiring taste. Audrey leaned in closer, dropping her voice to a whisper so Henderson wouldn't hear. Du Norsk." "Are you Norwegian?" she asked softly. The man's head snapped up. The spoon he had been holding clattered onto the table. His eyes went wide, the steel melting into pure shock. He looked at her as if she had just performed a magic trick. "Ja," he rasped. His voice was like gravel grinding together, unused and rusty. "Ja. Jäger Norsk. Yes. I am Norwegian." Audrey smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached her eyes. She switched effortlessly to the language she had practiced for hours in language labs. "Jeg snakker litt, min bestemor var fra Bergen. I speak a little. My grandmother was from Bergen." The man let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for years. His shoulders dropped 3 inches. The tension that had radiated off him vanished, replaced by a profound relief. "Takk," he whispered, his eyes glistening. "Ingen forstår meg. De tror jeg er gal." "Thank you. No one understands me. They think I am crazy." "Du er ikke gal," Audrey assured him. "Hva vil du ha?" "Vi har ikke sild men kokken har fersk laks." "You are not crazy. What do you want?" "We don't have herring, but the chef has fresh salmon." "Laks!" The man nodded enthusiastically. "Enkel, ingen sauce, bear laks och potater." Salmon. Simple. No sauce, just salmon and potatoes. "I will make it happen," she said in English, giving him a reassuring nod. She turned to head to the kitchen, feeling a strange sense of protectiveness over this stranger, but her path was blocked. Derek Sterling was standing in the aisle, blocking her way. He loomed over her, smelling of expensive cologne and arrogance. "What was that?" Derek demanded, loud enough for the room to hear. "What were you whispering to the hobo? Are you speaking bum language now? Helping him beg for change?" Audrey stiffened. "I was taking his order, sir. Please let me pass." "Taking his order?" "He didn't say a word." Derek shouted, grabbing Audrey's arm. "You're conspiring with him, aren't you? Is he a friend of yours? Another lowlife trying to scam a free meal?" "Let go of me," Audrey said firmly, pulling her arm back. "Make me," Derek sneered. "I spend $10,000 a month here. You're a nobody. If I tell Henderson you were rude to me, you're out on the street with your grandpa over there." "Is there a problem, Mr. Sterling?" Henderson appeared instantly, materializing like a bad smell. "Yes, there is." Derek pointed a finger at Audrey. "Your waitress is being aggressive, and she's feeding the rat in the corner. I want him gone, now, or I'm calling my father and telling him to buy this building just so he can evict this restaurant." Henderson turned on Audrey, his face pale with panic. "Audrey, what did you do?" "I took his order," Audrey said, her voice shaking with anger. "He wants the salmon. He's a paying customer." "He's a vagrant," Henderson screamed, losing his composure. "Look at him. He's dirtying the tablecloth. I told you to get him out, not feed him." Henderson marched over to the old man's table. He slammed his hand down on the white cloth, rattling the silverware. "All right, that's it. Show's over." Henderson spat at the man. "I don't care if you have a reservation card. You are disturbing my VIP guests. You need to leave, now." The man looked up at Henderson. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. He looked at Audrey, confusion clouding his face again. "Va cher?" "What is happening?" he asked Audrey, his voice trembling slightly. "Speak English," Henderson yelled in the man's face. "This is America. Get out." He grabbed the man's coat collar and hauled him upward. That was the mistake. The man didn't struggle. He didn't fight back. But as he stood up, his heavy wool coat fell open. Underneath the tattered, wet exterior, he wasn't wearing rags. He was wearing a suit, a bespoke midnight blue suit that fit him perfectly. And on the lapel of the suit jacket was a pin. It wasn't gold or diamond. It was a small, intricately carved piece of silver in the shape of a Viking ship. Derek Sterling, who had been laughing, suddenly stopped. He squinted at the pin. He recognized that symbol. Every banker in New York recognized that symbol. It was the crest of the Northern Star, the largest shipping conglomerate in the Atlantic. But Henderson didn't see the pin. He only saw a dirty coat. He shoved the man toward the door. The man stumbled, his heavy boots catching on the carpet, and he fell to one knee. A collective gasp went through the room. Audrey didn't think. She rushed forward, dropping her tray with a deafening crash, and knelt beside the man, helping him up. "Don't you touch him!" Audrey screamed at Henderson. It was the first time in 2 years she had raised her voice. "He is a human being." "He is trash," Henderson countered. "And you're fired. Get your things and get out, both of you." The old man stood up, brushing Audrey's hand gently aside. He dusted off his knees. He looked at Henderson, then at Derek, and finally at Audrey. The confusion was gone from his face. The steel was back, but now it was tempered with a cold, terrifying fire. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit and pulled out a phone. It wasn't a cracked old model. It was a satellite phone, the kind used by CEOs who needed to be reachable in the middle of the ocean. He dialed a number, put it to his ear, and spoke one sentence. It wasn't in Norwegian. It was in perfect, unaccented, terrifyingly clear English. "Arthur, it's me. Activate Protocol 0. He hung up. The room went dead silent. You speak English?" Henderson stammered, stepping back. The man looked at Henderson with a gaze that could freeze the sun. "I speak 5 languages." The man said, his voice deep and resonating with authority. "But I prefer to listen. It tells me who people really are." He turned to Audrey. "But sometimes," he said, a small smile touching his lips, "it takes a native tongue to find a native heart." The doors of the restaurant burst open. But it wasn't customers. 4 men in dark suits with earpieces marched in. They didn't look like security guards. They looked like special forces. They flanked the old man instantly. One of the agents stepped forward and handed the old man a fresh, dry overcoat cashmere worth more than Henderson's car. "Sir," the agent said, "the board is waiting." The old man nodded. He turned to the room, addressing the stunned diners. "My name is Torstein Vinter," he announced. The color drained from Derek Sterling's face. He dropped his wineglass. It shattered on the floor, red wine staining his expensive Armani pants, but he didn't even notice. "Torstein Vinter," Derek whispered, horror dawning on him. "The owner of the Zenith Group." The man Torstein nodded slowly at Derek. "Yes, I own the Zenith Group, which means I own this building, I own this land. And as of 5 minutes ago," he turned his cold eyes to Henderson, "I own this restaurant." The silence in the velvet room was no longer the silence of polite society. It was the silence of a tomb. Mr. Henderson stood frozen, his hand still hovering in the air where he had shoved Torstein moments before. His face, usually flushed with the heat of his own temper, was now a sickly shade of gray. He looked at the pin on Torstein's lapel, the Viking ship, and then at the 4 large men surrounding the billionaire. "Mr. Vinter," Henderson croaked, his voice cracking like dry wood. I didn't know. It was a misunderstanding. We have strict policies about dress codes. I was just trying to protect the integrity of the establishment." Torstein Vinter didn't shout. He didn't raise his voice. He simply adjusted the cuffs of his shirt, smoothing out the wrinkles caused by Henderson's rough handling. "Integrity," Torstein repeated, testing the word as if it tasted sour. "You think integrity is a suit? You think integrity is kicking an old man into the rain because his coat is wet?" Torstein stepped closer to Henderson. The floor manager shrank back, hitting the edge of a table. "I bought this restaurant chain 3 days ago," Torstein said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "I wanted to see how my employees treat the lowest among us, because how you treat a beggar is how you will eventually treat a client when their back is turned. And you, Mr. Henderson, have failed in the most spectacular fashion." "Please," Henderson begged, sweat pouring down his temples. "I have a mortgage. You have 5 minutes. Torstein cut him off coldly. "Pack your personal belongings. Leave your keys on the counter. If you are not off the premises in 5 minutes, my security team will remove you, and do not expect a reference." Two of the security agents stepped forward. Henderson looked around the room for support, but the wealthy patrons who had cheered him on moments ago were now studiously looking at their plates, terrified of drawing the billionaire's eye. Defeated Henderson slumped his shoulders and scurried toward the kitchen, his reign of terror over. Torstein then turned his gaze to table 4. Derek Sterling was trying to make himself small. He was tapping frantically on his phone, likely trying to delete the tweets he had posted about the hobo. "Mr. Sterling," Torstein said. Derek jumped. "Mr. Vinter, sir." "It was just a joke. We were just having a bit of fun. No hard feelings, right? My father, Richard, he speaks very highly of you." "Richard Sterling is a good businessman," Torstein acknowledged. "But he raised a fool." Derek's face went red. "My shipping company, Northern Star, currently handles the logistics for your father's construction materials coming from Europe," Torstein said, his tone conversational but deadly. "That contract is up for renewal next month. I think I will let it expire. I don't like doing business with families who lack manners." "No, you can't," Derek gasped, standing up. "That contract is worth millions. My dad will kill me." "Then perhaps you should learn to be humble," Torstein said, turning his back on him. "Enjoy your meal. It will be the last one you eat in any of my properties. You are banned from all Zenith Group locations. Worldwide." Derek stood there, mouth agape, as his friends awkwardly gathered their purses and coats, distancing themselves from him like he was radioactive. Finally, Torstein turned to Audrey. She was still standing near the service station, trembling. The adrenaline was wearing off, replaced by the crushing reality of her situation. She had just screamed at her boss. She was definitely fired, regardless of what Torstein said. She was a nobody caught in a war of giants. Torstein's expression softened completely. The cold tycoon vanished, replaced by the weary traveler she had served water to. "Du mistet jobben din for meg." "You lost your job for me," he said softly in Norwegian. Audrey nodded, switching back to English, her voice shaky. "I did, but it was the right thing to do. Nobody deserves to be treated like that." Torstein looked at her name tag. "Audrey. Do you know why I ordered the rackfisk, the fermented fish, even though I knew you wouldn't have it?" "To test us," Audrey guessed. "To see if anyone would try to understand," Torstein corrected. "Most people hear a foreign language and they get angry. They feel excluded. But you leaned in. You tried to bridge the gap. That is a rare skill, Audrey. Rarer than gold." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. It was heavy black with gold lettering. "I need a translator," Torstein said. "My personal interpreter recently retired. It is a demanding job. It requires travel discretion and the ability to deal with difficult people like Mr. Sterling over there. The starting salary is $120,000 a year plus benefits and housing." Audrey's breath hitched. The room spun. $120,000. That was more money than her parents had made in a decade. It would pay off her student loans, her rent, everything. I haven't finished my degree yet," she stammered. "I'm still a student." "I don't care about a piece of paper," Torstein said firmly. "I care about character. You stood up for a stranger when you had everything to lose. That is the only qualification I need." He held out the card. "Be at this address tomorrow morning at 8:00 a.m. Don't be late." Audrey reached out her hand, shaking, and took the card. "Thank you, Mr. Vinter. Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Torstein said, a shadow passing over his eyes. "The world I live in? It is much colder than this restaurant. You survived Henderson, but the sharks in my boardroom bite much harder." He signaled to his guards. "Let's go." As Torstein walked out into the rain, now shielded by a massive umbrella held by an agent, Audrey stood alone in the center of the restaurant. The other waiters stared at her with a mix of jealousy and awe. She looked at the card in her hand. Vinter Tower, penthouse office. She didn't know it yet, but the rainstorm was the easy part. The hurricane was just beginning. The next morning, the sky over New York was a brilliant, deceptive blue. Audrey stood on the sidewalk looking up at Vinter Tower. It was a monolith of black glass and steel that seemed to pierce the clouds. It was intimidating, cold, and beautiful. She smoothed down her skirt. It was her best outfit, a charcoal pencil skirt and a white blouse she had bought for interviews, but compared to the people walking in and out of the building, she felt like she was wearing a costume. The women wore suits that cost more than her car. The men checked watches worth more than her education. She took a deep breath. "Fake it till you make it, Audrey." She entered the lobby. It was cavernous, echoing with the sound of expensive footsteps. She approached the front desk. "I'm here to see Mr. Vinter," she told the receptionist, a woman with hair so tight it looked painful. The receptionist didn't even look up. "Mr. Vinter doesn't see walk-ins. Leave your resume in the bin by the door." "I have an appointment," Audrey said, forcing her voice to be steady. "He told me to come at 8:00 a.m. The receptionist finally looked up, her eyes scanning Audrey's outfit with a sneer. "Honey, Mr. Vinter is the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate. He doesn't make appointments with whoever you are. Please leave before I call security." Audrey felt a flash of heat in her cheeks. It was happening again, the judgment, the assumption that she didn't belong. She reached into her purse and pulled out the black and gold card. She slapped it onto the marble counter. "He gave me this. Check the schedule." The receptionist glanced at the card. Her eyes widened slightly. It wasn't a standard company card. It was his private line card. She typed something into her computer, her demeanor shifting instantly from arrogance to panic. Ms. Miller?" the receptionist stuttered. "Yes." I apologize. You're listed as a priority level 1 guest. Please take the private elevator on the far left. It goes directly to the penthouse." Audrey took the card back. "Thank you." As the elevator shot upward, Audrey's ears popped. She watched the numbers climb, 40, 50, 80, 102. The doors opened directly into an office that was larger than her entire apartment building. One wall was entirely glass, overlooking Central Park. The furniture was modern, sleek, and terrifyingly white, but the room wasn't empty. Torstein Vinter was sitting behind a massive oak desk, but standing in front of him were two people who looked like they were ready for war. One was a woman tall with razor-sharp cheekbones and blonde hair cut in a severe bob. She wore a red power suit that screamed aggression. The other was a man younger, perhaps 30, with slicked-back dark hair and a nervous energy. "Uncle Torstein, this is insanity," the woman was shouting. "You can't just hire a waitress from a diner to handle the Stavanger merger. This is a multi-billion-dollar energy deal. We need legal counsel. We need professionals." "Beatrice," Torstein said calmly, spotting Audrey. "She is here." The woman Beatrice spun around. Her eyes drilled into Audrey. It wasn't just judgment. It was hatred. "This is her—" Beatrice laughed a harsh, brittle sound. "She looks like she bought her shoes at a discount outlet. Does she even have a passport?" Audrey stepped out of the elevator. She felt small, but she remembered Torstein's words. Integrity isn't a suit. "I do have a passport," Audrey said, walking forward. "And I speak 4 languages fluently. English, Norwegian, German, and French." Beatrice looked her up and down. "Speaking is one thing. Understanding business is another. I am Beatrice Vinter, the chief operating officer of this company. And frankly, you are a liability." "Beatrice," Torstein warned, his voice low, "Audrey is my guest. And my employee. She will be accompanying me to Oslo for the final negotiations with the Norwegian Energy Ministry." "To Oslo," the younger man spoke up. He looked at Audrey with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. "Uncle, the negotiations are technical. It's about oil rights and deep-sea drilling. What is she going to do? Order lunch? This is my nephew Conrad." Torstein introduced him to Audrey, ignoring Conrad's insult. "He handles or attempts to handle public relations." "Nice to meet you," Audrey said politely. Conrad didn't shake her hand. "Audrey is not here for the technical jargon," Torstein explained, standing up. He looked frailer than he had the night before. He leaned heavily on a cane. She is here because the Minister of Energy, Olaf Solberg, is an old-fashioned man. He doesn't trust lawyers. He doesn't trust contracts. He trusts people. And right now I am surrounded by sharks." He looked pointedly at Beatrice and Conrad. "I need someone who can listen to what is said between the lines," Torstein continued. "Audrey heard a mute man asking for herring and saw a human being. You two would have seen a nuisance. That is why she is going." Beatrice narrowed her eyes. She walked over to Audrey, invading her personal space. She smelled of expensive perfume and cold ambition. "Listen to me, little girl," Beatrice whispered too low for Torstein to hear. "This isn't Pretty Woman. This is real life. If you mess up this deal, if you embarrass this family, I will make sure you never work in this city again. I will bury you." Audrey's heart hammered against her ribs. She wanted to run. She wanted to go back to the Velvet Room and deal with Henderson's yelling. That was safe. This was dangerous. But then she looked at Torstein. He looked tired. He looked lonely. He was a billionaire, yes, but in this room with his own family, he was the prey. Audrey squared her shoulders. She looked Beatrice in the eye. "I'm not here to embarrass anyone, Ms. Vinter," Audrey said calmly. "I'm here to do a job. And if your uncle trusts me, that should be enough for you." Beatrice stepped back, a flicker of surprise on her face. She hadn't expected the mouse to bite back. "We leave in 3 hours," Torstein announced, cutting the tension. "Audrey there is a stylist waiting in the guest suite downstairs. They will provide you with appropriate attire for the trip. The climate in Oslo is unforgiving." "Yes, sir," Audrey said. "And Audrey," Torstein added. "Yes. Be careful," he said, glancing at his niece and nephew. "The wolves are not always in the forest. Sometimes they sit at the dinner table." As Audrey left the office, she felt the heavy gaze of Beatrice burning into her back. She knew with absolute certainty that Beatrice wasn't going to let this go. Audrey was entering a world of private jets, 5-star hotels, and billion-dollar contracts. But she was also entering a battlefield. And she had no idea that the Stavanger merger wasn't just about oil. It was about the succession of the Vinter empire. Torstein was dying. Beatrice knew it. Conrad knew it. And they had just realized that the old man had brought in a wild card, a waitress who could ruin their plans to carve up his legacy. Downstairs in the styling suite, Audrey stood in front of a mirror as a team of assistants pinned a navy wool dress on her. She looked like a different person. She looked powerful. "Ready for the show?" the stylist asked, handing her a pair of leather gloves. Audrey took a deep breath. She thought of her unpaid rent. She thought of the look in Derek Sterling's eyes when he realized who Torstein was. "I'm ready," Audrey whispered. But she wasn't, because in Oslo it wasn't just words she would have to translate. It was betrayal. The private jet touched down at Oslo Airport Gardermoen under a blanket of gray clouds. Snow swirled across the tarmac, a stark contrast to the humid rain of New York. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere was colder than the air outside. For the entire 7-hour flight, Beatrice Vinter had ignored Audrey, speaking only to Conrad, or typing furiously on her laptop. Torstein had slept for most of the journey, his breathing shallow and rattling in his chest. He looked fragile, like a dried leaf ready to crumble. "We are here," Beatrice announced, snapping her laptop shut. She looked at Audrey with a disdainful curl of her lip. "Listen to me closely. This meeting is with Minister Olaf Solberg. He is a hardliner. He hates Americans. He hates outsiders. Do not speak unless spoken to. Actually, don't speak at all. Just hold Torstein's briefcase and look professional." "I understand," Audrey said quietly. They were whisked away in a convoy of black SUVs to the Grand Hotel in the city center. The meeting was to take place in a private conference room overlooking the Parliament building. When they entered the room, Minister Solberg was already there. He was a bear of a man with a thick white beard and eyes that looked like chips of ice. He was flanked by 2 stern-looking advisors. Torstein walked in leaning heavily on his cane. Audrey stayed close to his left side, ready to catch him if he stumbled. "Olaf," Torstein said, extending a trembling hand. "It has been a long time." Solberg didn't smile. He shook the hand briefly. Torstein, you look tired. I am old Olaf. Not tired, Torstein corrected, sitting down slowly. Beatrice immediately took the seat opposite Solberg, opening her files. Minister Solberg, let's skip the pleasantries. We have the revised contracts for the Stavanger oil fields. The Zenith Group is prepared to offer a 5% increase in royalties to the state in exchange for exclusive drilling rights for the next 20 years. Solberg leaned back, crossing his massive arms. He didn't look at Beatrice. He looked at Torstein. I told you 10 years ago, Torstein, Solberg said in heavily accented English. This land is not for sale to foreign corporations who only care about stock prices. My people in the north, they are worried. They think you will come take the oil and leave a mess behind. We have environmental protocols, Conrad interjected, flashing a slick salesman smile. World class. Best in the industry. Solberg ignored him. He turned to his aide and muttered something in Norwegian. It was fast, low, and thick with a dialect Audrey hadn't heard in textbooks. It was the dialect of the western fjords, rural, rough, and almost impossible for a standard speaker to catch. De som gribbar. De bryr seg ikke om landet, bare pengene. Når Torstein dør, kjem den kvinna til å selge alt til amerikanerne. They are like vultures. They don't care about the land, only the money. When Torstein dies, that woman will sell everything to the Americans. Beatrice smiled tightly, assuming he was just consulting his team. As my nephew said, our protocols are ironclad. Solberg looked back at Beatrice, his face hardening. I am not convinced. I think we are done here. He started to stand up. The deal was dead. Beatrice's eyes widened in panic. Wait! Beatrice snapped. Minister, you can't walk away. This is a $1 billion offer. Money is paper. Solberg grunted. Trust is stone, and I do not see stone here. Torstein tried to speak, but a fit of coughing seized him. He hacked violently, his face turning red. Beatrice looked at him with annoyance rather than concern. Audrey stepped forward. She didn't look at Beatrice. She looked directly at Solberg. Minister, she said, but she didn't speak in English, and she didn't speak in the standard bokmål Norwegian she had used in the restaurant. She shifted her intonation, softening the vowels, adopting the rhythm of the western coast. She spoke in his dialect. Ein gribbet bare date som dött, she said softly. A vulture only eats what is dead. Men vi her fordi vi vill at landet skal leve. Torstein bygde dette selskapet på ære, ikke bare profit. But we are here because we want the land to live. Torstein built this company on honor, not just profit. Solberg froze. He stared at Audrey as if a statue had just come to life. The room went silent. You? Solberg squinted at her. You speak the dialect of Moor. You are American. Bestemor var fra Ålesund, Audrey replied with a respectful nod. Grandmother was from Ålesund. She taught me that a contract without heart is just ink. Solberg slowly sat back down. The ice in his eyes began to melt. A small, incredulous smile tugged at his beard. Ålesund, he chuckled. Fishermen people. Stubborn people. Very stubborn. Audrey agreed with a smile. But loyal. Solberg looked at Torstein, who had recovered from his coughing fit and was watching Audrey with a look of intense pride. Torstein, Solberg said, switching back to English but with a much warmer tone. You did not tell me you brought a girl from the fjords. She is my voice, Torstein rasped, when I am too weak to speak. Solberg nodded. He looked at Beatrice, who was sitting with her mouth slightly open, completely unable to comprehend what had just happened. She looked furious that she had lost control of the room to a waitress. Fine, Solberg said. If this young woman is the one overseeing the communication between my office and your board, then we will talk. I trust the tongue of the West. He picked up the pen. We will sign the preliminary agreement, but... He pointed a finger at Beatrice. If I sense any betrayal, any deviation from what this young woman has promised, I will burn the contract." Beatrice forced a smile that looked like a grimace. "Of course, Minister. Audrey will be very involved." As they left the room 20 minutes later, the deal secured, Conrad looked at Audrey with a new kind of expression, fear. But Beatrice didn't look afraid. She looked murderous. She grabbed Audrey's arm as they walked down the hallway to the elevators. Her grip was painful. "Do you think you're clever?" Beatrice hissed, her voice trembling with rage. "You think because you learned some hillbilly words you're part of this family? You are nothing." "I just saved your deal," Audrey said, pulling her arm away. "You humiliated me," Beatrice spat. "And nobody humiliates me. Enjoy your victory lap, waitress, because the race isn't over." The celebration dinner that night was held in the private dining room of the hotel. It was a somber affair. Torstein was clearly deteriorating. He didn't eat. He just sat at the head of the table, sipping water, watching his family with sad eyes. Midway through the meal, Torstein gestured for Audrey to come closer. "Sir," she asked, bending down. "Audrey," he whispered. His hand reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, slim black folder. It wasn't the contract. It was something else. "Take this," he said, his voice barely audible. "Hide it. Do not let Beatrice or Conrad see it." "What is it?" "It is the insurance." Torstein gasped. "If anything happens to me, open it. It contains the truth about the sterling deal." Before Audrey could ask what he meant, Torstein's eyes suddenly rolled back. He slumped forward, his head hitting the table with a sickening thud. "Uncle!" Conrad shouted. Pandemonium broke out. Waiters rushed over. Beatrice stood up screaming for a doctor, but Audrey saw something chilling. For a split second before the mask of panic slid into place, Beatrice didn't look surprised. She looked relieved. 2 hours later, Audrey was sitting in the sterile waiting room of Oslo University Hospital. The lights were humming, giving her a headache. She had the black folder tucked tight against her ribs, hidden under her blazer. Beatrice came marching out of the emergency ward. She wasn't crying. She was typing on her phone. She stopped in front of Audrey. "Give me the company credit card," Beatrice demanded, holding out her hand. "What?" Audrey blinked. "How is he?" "Is he okay?" "He is in a coma," Beatrice said coldly. "The doctors say it's a massive stroke. He likely won't wake up, which means I am now the acting CEO of the Zenith Group." She snapped her fingers. "The card, and your hotel key." I don't understand," Audrey stammered. "I need a place to stay. I'm part of the team." "You were Torstein's pet," Beatrice corrected. "Torstein is gone. You are fired. Effective immediately." "You can't do that." Audrey stood up. "He hired me. He wanted me here." "I can do whatever I want," Beatrice sneered. "You are an at-will employee on a probationary period. I just terminated you, and since your work visa was sponsored by the company, it is now void. You have 24 hours to leave Norway before I call immigration and have you deported." Conrad stepped up behind Beatrice, looking smug. "We already checked you out of the hotel. Your bags are in the lobby. Here is an economy ticket back to New York. It leaves at 6:00 a.m. He tossed a crumpled boarding pass at her chest. "But the deal," Audrey argued, panic rising in her throat. "Minister Solberg said he would only work with me." "Solberg doesn't need to know you're gone until the final ink is dry." Beatrice laughed. "We'll tell him you're sick. By the time he realizes, it'll be too late." Beatrice leaned in close, her eyes predatory. "Go back to serving pasta, Audrey. This world was never meant for you." They turned and walked away, leaving Audrey alone in the hospital corridor. She had no job, no place to sleep, no money of her own, and she was in a foreign country where a winter storm was raging outside. She walked out of the hospital, the cold wind biting her face. She found a small 24-hour cafe nearby and sat in the back corner, shivering. She looked at the crumpled plane ticket. She could just go home. She could forget all of this. She could go back to being invisible. But then she felt the hard edge of the black folder against her side. The insurance. Torstein had trusted her. He had seen something in her that no one else had. With trembling hands, Audrey placed the black folder on the sticky cafe table and opened it. Her eyes scanned the documents inside. There were emails, bank transfers, and a draft of a secret contract. Audrey gasped. The documents proved that Beatrice wasn't trying to merge with the Norwegian state for the company's benefit. She was artificially inflating the company's value with the oil deal so she could sell the Zenith Group to Sterling Industries, Richard Sterling's company. It was a hostile takeover from the inside. But that wasn't the worst part. There was an email from Richard Sterling to Beatrice. Once the acquisition is complete, we will dissolve the brand. We will liquidate the assets. The Zenith name will cease to exist, and you, Beatrice, will get your $50 million payout. They were going to destroy Torstein's legacy. Everything he had built for 50 years. They were going to strip it for parts and erase his name from history. And Derek Sterling, the man who had mocked Torstein in the restaurant, would be laughing all the way to the bank. Audrey looked up. Her reflection in the cafe window looked tired, pale, and frightened. But then she remembered the look on Henderson's face when Torstein stood up. She remembered the look on Solberg's face when she spoke his language. She wasn't just a waitress. She was the only person standing between a good man's legacy and the vultures. She checked her watch. It was 2:00 a.m. The final signing ceremony with Minister Solberg, where the contract would become official, was scheduled for 9:00 a.m. at the Parliament. Beatrice and Conrad would be there. They thought Audrey was on a plane. Audrey closed the folder. She didn't head for the airport. She stood up, grabbed her coat, and walked out into the snow. She had 7 hours to figure out how to crash the most high-security meeting in Norway. She wasn't going to speak English. She wasn't going to speak Norwegian. She was going to speak the language of war. The Stortinget, the Norwegian parliament, was a fortress of yellow brick and serious men. Inside the main chamber, the clock ticked toward 9:00 a.m. Minister Olaf Solberg sat at the mahogany table, his pen hovering over the final contracts. Opposite him, Beatrice Vinter tapped her manicured fingernails on the wood, barely concealing her impatience. Conrad sat beside her, already texting Derek Sterling under the table. Done deal. Get the champagne. The terms are agreeable, Solberg said slowly, though he looked troubled. I am sorry Torstein could not be here. It is a tragedy. Beatrice sighed, forcing a sad expression. But he would want us to move forward. The company must survive. Solberg nodded. He lowered the pen to the paper. Bang! The heavy double doors of the chamber didn't just open, they slammed against the walls. 2 security guards stumbled in, trying to restrain a figure in a heavy snow-dampened coat. Stop! The figure screamed. Beatrice shot up from her chair. Security! Get her out of here! She is a deranged former employee. It was Audrey. Her hair was matted with melting snow, her face pale from exhaustion, but her eyes were blazing. She wrestled free from a guard's grip, stepping into the center of the room. Minister Solberg! Audrey shouted. Do not sign that paper. This is embarrassing. Conrad sneered, standing up. She's a stalker, Minister. She was fired for misconduct. We'll handle this. Conrad moved to grab Audrey, but she didn't look at him. She looked directly at the old minister, locking eyes with him. And once again she didn't speak the language of business. She spoke the language of the fjords. Olaf de sell arven din til ulvane. Olaf. They are selling your heritage to the wolves. She cried out, her voice cracking with emotion. Dette ikke en fusjon. Det ei slakting. This is not a merger. It is a slaughter. Solberg froze. The pen dropped from his hand. He held up a hand to the guards. Vent. Wait, he commanded. Minister, please. Beatrice hissed, her composure cracking. She is lying. She is a waitress from New York. She knows nothing of high finance. Audrey slammed the black folder onto the table, sliding it across the polished wood until it hit Solberg's hand. "Read it," Audrey panted. "The email from Richard Sterling, dated 2 days ago." Solberg opened the folder. The room went deathly silent. Beatrice's face drained of blood. She recognized the folder. She had seen Torstein holding it the night before. As Solberg read, his face turned a shade of red that matched the flag behind him. His hands began to shake, not from age, but from fury. "Liquidate." Solberg read aloud, his voice low and dangerous. "Dissolve the Zenith brand. Fire the European staff. Sell the drilling rights to the highest bidder." He looked up at Beatrice. The ice in his eyes was gone, replaced by an inferno. "You lied to me," Solberg whispered. "You looked me in the eye on the soil of my ancestors, and you lied." It's just a draft." Beatrice stammered, backing away. "It's a contingency plan. Standard business practice." "It is betrayal!" Solberg roared, slamming his fist on the table. "The deal is dead. Get out of my office. Get out of my country." "You can't do this," Beatrice shrieked. "I am the acting CEO. I control the voting shares." "No," a weak voice came from the doorway. "You don't." Everyone turned. Sitting in a wheelchair pushed by a nurse was Torstein Vinter. He was pale, connected to an IV drip, and looked as if death was hovering over his shoulder. But he was awake. "Uncle," Conrad whispered, terrified. "I heard you," Torstein rasped. "I heard you in the hospital room. You thought I was unconscious. But I was just listening." Torstein pointed a shaking finger at Audrey. "Audrey," he said, "open the last page of the folder." Audrey flipped to the back of the black dossier. There was a legal document notarized and stamped with the official seal of the Vinter Trust. "Read it," Torstein commanded. Audrey's eyes scanned the page. It says that in the event of Torstein Vinter's incapacitation or death, the voting rights of the Zenith Group are not transferred to the next of kin." She looked up, stunned. "They are transferred to the appointed trustee of the Vinter Charitable Trust," Audrey read. She looked at the name typed on the line. Audrey Miller. "What?" Beatrice screamed. She's a nobody. She served us water yesterday." "She served me with dignity," Torstein said, his voice gaining strength. "She defended a stranger when it cost her everything. That is who runs my company, not vultures, not liars." Torstein looked at the security guards. "Please remove the trespassers. My trustee and I have business to discuss with the minister." Beatrice lunged toward the table, but the guards caught her. As she was dragged out, kicking and screaming threats of lawsuits, Conrad followed, his head hung low, knowing his life of luxury was over. The doors closed, leaving only the sound of the wind outside. Solberg looked at Torstein, then at Audrey. He picked up the pen again. "So," the minister grunted, a sparkle returning to his eye. "Audrey Miller, trustee, do you still want to buy my oil?" Audrey looked at Torstein. He nodded. "No, minister," Audrey said, sitting in the chair Beatrice had vacated. "We don't want to buy it. We want to partner with you. On your terms. To build something that lasts." Solberg smiled. "Now that sounds like a deal." The rain was falling in New York just as it had that fateful night. But inside the velvet room, everything had changed. Audrey walked through the front doors. She wasn't wearing an apron. She was wearing a tailored black suit. She didn't look tired. She looked radiant. The new floor manager, a kind woman named Sarah, rushed over. "Ms. Miller, your table is ready." "Thank you, Sarah," Audrey smiled. She walked to the corner table, the one by the window hidden behind the pillar. Torstein was waiting for her. He looked healthier now, though he still used a cane. He was retired, living his days in peace, knowing his legacy was safe. "How was the board meeting?" Torstein asked as she sat down. Intense? Audrey admitted. We just acquired Sterling Industries. Richard Sterling had to sell to avoid bankruptcy after the scandal broke. And the son, Derek? He's looking for work, Audrey said, taking a sip of water. I heard he applied here, for a busboy position. Torstein chuckled, breaking off a piece of bread. Did you hire him? I told the manager to give him a chance, Audrey said. Everyone deserves a chance to learn humility. I just hope he learns to listen. Torstein raised his glass. To listening, Audrey clinked her glass against his. To the native tongue. She looked out the window at the city. She had once been invisible to this world. But she had learned the most important lesson of all. The most powerful voice in the room isn't the one shouting. It's the one that speaks the truth, even when her voice shakes. The silent billionaire had found his voice, and the waitress had found her power. What a journey! From a disregarded waitress to the CEO of a billion-dollar empire, Audrey proved that true power isn't about the clothes you wear or the money in your pocket. It's about integrity, kindness, and the courage to speak up when others stay silent. The villains like Beatrice and Derek Sterling learned the hard way that arrogance is a fragile shield, while Torstein showed us that the quietest people are often the most observant. If you enjoyed this story of karmic justice and hidden identities, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. What would you have done if you were in Audrey's shoes when Beatrice fired her? Would you have fought back or gone home? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss our next dramatic story. Thanks for watching.